What's up, y'all? TBrown31 here with JaboctheGreat. This is once again another episode of the Last Word podcast. This time we are doing yet another recap of college football for the month of October. This time we did one in September. Now we're doing one in October. Just 4 weeks left in this college football season. It's going by so fast. It just seemed like it just started. But already it's about to hit the end part as we're wrapping things up. So we're going to recap, kind of the last few weeks, kind of wrap up the last few weeks more and look at the rankings as the new rankings for the college football playoff will actually come out tomorrow. And we'll preview the last few weeks of this season with a lot of these top teams playing each other. So bringing it to the last set of rankings, Georgia still once again at the top, leading the SEC overall. Not really surprising. Kind of a weird performance against Florida this past weekend. They didn't start out all that well, but then pretty much like all of Georgia's games for the last few weeks, they came out after that, played perfectly fine, got a 43-20 victory. And at this point, obviously they have Mizzou this week, 3:30. That'll be a good game. They play Ole Miss the next week. Then they play Tennessee, so that's 3 ranked opponents in the SEC for the next couple of weeks. But I just don't really see them losing for the rest of the season. They finish out at Georgia Tech. So you can argue about how impressive these wins have been, but I don't really see them losing and falling from the top 4 as of right now.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. They've been a weird team kind of this season, but they've still been a solid team. And they've got some tough opponents maybe coming up with Missouri and Ole Miss. Those will give them some trouble. Tennessee could as well. Georgia Tech probably not, but I would still expect them to win out on that one. From there, number 2 also stayed the same from our previous rankings. Michigan stays up there, having a pretty good season. So they are playing pretty strong. Next week they will be up against Purdue. We know that Purdue loves to ruin the dreams of ranked teams, but I don't see that happening against this Michigan team. And then let's see, they'll face against Penn State the week after that, November 11th. That will be a ranked matchup as of right now. Penn State also weird this year. I think Michigan would probably handle that one as well. Going in to November 18th, they would then face Maryland. That one's probably already wrapped up. You can put a bow on that one. And then to close out the season, they will, of course, as always, play Ohio State. That one is always kind of a toss-up game. You go either way, that usually determines the fate of Michigan or Ohio State, depending on where it goes. Personally, with the way these two teams have played, I could see it going either way. I might currently lean, though, to say that Michigan would win out and be able to handle Ohio State in this one this year. So I think that's, as usual, Michigan will have a fun run to close their season, mostly thanks to the fact that they always conclude against Ohio State and things like that. So I look forward to seeing where that goes. I think they'll hold on to 2. There's arguments this season to be made that they could have cracked in that number 1 spot. Maybe they could if they finished out and handled Ohio State well, but I think that Georgia and Michigan might be a lock for 1 and 2 throughout the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you could have put them, up at 1. It really wouldn't matter that much at this point. Obviously, they do play, like you said, Ohio State, who's right below them at 3 now. After the past couple weeks, they played Wisconsin, and of course, that dominating game that we covered against Penn State a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, I would say both teams probably will win out, and then depending on how things go below them, might end up seeing another situation where both teams get in. But I think there's a little bit more teams this year that would definitely be more worthy of getting in. If one of these 2 teams were to fall, I think it just kind of depends on what happens below them. Florida State, they happen to lose, or Washington. If Oregon or Texas or Bama, somebody else, they get their second loss, that would eliminate them. It just kind of depends. But yeah, right now, that's probably, I wouldn't even say probably, easily the most important game for both of these teams coming up at the end of the season. And then Florida State right now, they've been on a roll, undefeated so far this year. We covered that first game against LSU. They're down at 4, just coming off of beating Wake Forest 41-16. Nice couple of weeks for Florida State. They've got Pittsburgh coming up next week. They got Miami, so that's a big rivalry game for them as well. And then the week after that, tune-up game, North Alabama. Nothing really crazy there. And of course, Florida State will finish off against Florida as they always do. Big game for them. Um, Florida State's also been kind of weird. They haven't been super dominant every game. Remember the Clemson game? We talked about that. Boston College game. That was probably too close for comfort, but they've been impressive this season. They haven't lost a game. Can't really take anything away from them. And if they do win the ACC, win the ACC, you would expect they'll probably be up there as well.
Yeah, so going from there, we get number 5, Washington. Has actually been one of my personal favorites this year. I am a Clemson student and Clemson fan. We have not had a whole lot to hold on to this particular season. So it's been nice to look to other teams. Washington has been an exciting team to watch, and they've actually got not the hardest path ahead of them before the season ends either. They could try to crack into that top 4, depending on mainly what goes on between Michigan and Ohio State. And as a matter of fact, Washington loss might be the most beneficial thing to either Michigan or Ohio State if they're looking to lose. One of them has to lose that game against each other, and then you need something to go wrong below you to stay up. So that would be kind of what they need. But Washington will face off against Caleb Williams this coming week. Caleb Williams and company at Southern California have not had a good time against ranked teams, and maybe this would have been a hot take like 3 weeks ago, but I'm not sure it's so hot now. I would probably take Washington to win that game. I just trust them a lot more so far. They've been more poised at the season. They'll actually get a week off after that, if I'm correct. And then in week 12, they'll face Oregon State. Oregon State's been a tough opponent to some teams here and there, but they've also dropped two games. I think Washington would probably be able to hold off on that one. Oregon State, not a team of scrubs by any means. I think they could put up a fight. And of course, you got the conference rivalry there. But Washington is probably the better team there, and they probably will get one of the easier closings out of the top 5, maybe outside of Georgia facing Georgia Tech. They get to face Washington State, who started off as kind of one of these scarier teams for the ranked teams, and they have since not been that. So I think Michael Penix and Washington will continue to be able to cruise through the end of the season. Their biggest challenge will be this coming week against USC. And if they're able to handle that, I definitely think they win out and could make a big push to get into that top 4. I would personally like to see them in there. I think it'd be a shame if they got up there and don't get in. If they go undefeated and don't get in. So personally, I hope they make it. I think they have a pretty good shot. They just got to get past Caleb Williams this next week and stay afloat till the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about a scenario where obviously, Georgia wins the SEC, either Michigan or Ohio State, they win the Big Ten probably. Then Florida State wins the ACC, Washington, they win the Pac-12. They're all undefeated. Obviously either Michigan or Ohio State's going to have one loss. I don't really see a scenario where you can put one of those one-loss teams ahead of them. So yeah, I would definitely say they're in. But just the way college football is, you got to assume one of these 5 teams, well, I'd say one of the other 4 teams outside of whoever loses that Michigan Ohio State game, they might lose too. We just said that they'll probably win out, but you never really know. And that brings us to those one-loss teams. So you've got 6 of them directly behind, actually. Of course, there are more teams, at the bottom, so like Missouri, Louisville, 14, 15, Tulane, 21. But for those top tier teams at the top there, you've got 6 through 11 all with just one loss. Right now, Oregon, they beat the heck out of Utah. I mean, I talked to you about the game, after we picked Oregon last week, but I was not expecting that. I mean, Utah really, outside of like a couple drives early, they really just did not have it in that game. Oregon pretty much dominated. Bo Nix looked as good as he's ever looked, increasing his Heisman chances for sure. So I'm assuming right now it's going to be a rematch between Oregon and Washington in the Pac-12 championship. And if Oregon wins that one, then you kind of got that scenario. It's like, all right, well, the second time around means more. If it's in a championship game, that's kind of how they usually look at it. And in that scenario, Oregon might, jump Washington there. But if they lose, obviously at that point, they got 2 losses. I think they'd be out. And then for Texas absolutely loves that Oklahoma lost to Kansas this past weekend. Both teams are at 1 loss each. Texas also just jumped Oklahoma, moving from 7. Oklahoma's down to 10 now. So Now, if they probably play in a rematch again, whoever wins, they'll have a chance depending on what happens above them. Whoever loses is obviously very, you know, eliminated with 2 losses just like that. Um, Especially if it's Oklahoma, they just lost to Kansas, who I know is ranked now, but Texas 1 loss being Oklahoma would not be as bad. So those are really the teams I would say would have a chance. I think Penn State, you've got to beat Michigan to get in my opinion. I still don't think that would happen. You got to beat Michigan. You got to win the Big Ten, in my opinion. Alabama, big game coming up against LSU. We're going to talk about that later this week. That one definitely going to be, at least for LSU. If LSU beats Alabama, I think that would be an elimination game for Bama. LSU at this point wouldn't really matter much, as far as playoff goes. Of course, SEC title chances, different story.
Yeah, so I think you kind of wrap that up there with the 7-1 teams. There's a few other ones that are kind of scattered about, right? At 14, like you said, Missouri, if they were able to pull off this win against Georgia, that would change things drastically, as with them being 8-1 and then Georgia being 8-1. Other than that, Missouri is one of those 7-1 teams that's probably just going to kind of float around and be able to say at the end of the year, we had a good season, and move on. But if they pull off that win against Georgia, then sure, we see some major shakeup with that particular outcome. Otherwise, a lot of the other top 25 teams are just going to do the same thing, hoping to in the season having a good season and maybe play some spoiler to some rivals. Right, Notre Dame is 12th; they're 6-2. They've already done a little bit of spoiling to USC. They'll get to play Clemson this upcoming week. There's no spoiling to do to Clemson. They're done. But that's pretty much kind of the state of the rest of the table. Teams like Tulane are interesting down at 21 and 7-1, right? There's probably not many opportunities for them to get up anywhere. They have a game upcoming against East Carolina. That wouldn't do much with a win other than keep them alive and on the radar. They'll play Tulsa after that. Same thing there. Going from there, they play Florida Atlantic. And then to finish out the season, if they stayed up there and stayed ranked, they play UTSA, right? So Tulane is a perfect example of a team that could win out, be a 1-loss team, stay up in those teens, high or low 20s area of the ranking, and just be able to say, hey, we had a good season. Now, some of it comes down to who you play and not being able to make the biggest splashes all the time. But there's definitely some interesting things here. James Madison is 23rd. They're 8-0. That's another team that's just not really going to have much room to move and make anything shake, even if they went out. That's just kind of the unfortunate way of the way that college football goes. Same thing with Air Force. What's interesting to think about this year is that, with all the hype around Caleb Williams, it is weird to see teams like Air Force or James Madison be ranked above Southern California. But with them taking those 2 losses and struggling generally against better teams, it makes things a little tougher. And I think they are one of the biggest ones that could play spoiler, right? If they beat Washington in this upcoming week, I'm not sure if it does much for them other than just give them the satisfaction that Washington probably ends up missing out on a playoff spot, right? They've already got those 2 losses. They would need a lot to shake up in their conference. Oregon is probably the next up if Washington ends up going down. So I'm not sure that would do much for them. They'll play Oregon after that, so they could try to spoil both of them. That would maybe end up making things a little different, especially if they get Oregon and give Oregon a second loss. But otherwise, USC and Caleb Williams are kind of just fighting to ruin the lives of their conference rivals. They don't really have much room to climb back up into that top area. I think there's just so much scrutiny around them now, and some of that comes with that hype built up around you, and then you start to get more spotlight on you, and when you crumble under the lights, you're gonna get more criticism for it. So I don't think USC has necessarily had a bad season, but it definitely has to suck to go back-to-back years and having these kind of unfortunate events occur to send you down. So we talked about this just slightly before the show with certain analysts saying that Caleb Williams should maybe sit now. I can assure you that Terrence and I don't agree. He should definitely keep playing and building up his own stock, but would help if he didn't lose in the process trying to do that.